Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the DSCI Best Practice Meet 2021. This is the 13th edition of our flagship event. By looking at the digitalization context for the next decade, we have kept the theme for BPM 2021 to be Security Decade, enabling digital innovation of this decade. Welcome to the session on microservice security, heterogeneous deployment, polyglot of programming language and framework, complex trust issue, and decentralized cloud infrastructure. The session would be more focused on the challenges, best practice, possible targets for microservice security. Also, the session would be giving the perspective on the security framework and the perspective on the microservice architecture. We have an eclectic line of speakers deliberating on the microservice security. I would like to invite Mr. Srihari Koti, CISO, Reliance Payment Solution Limited.
Yep, thank you, Ishan.
Welcome, Mr. Srihari. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Deepa Kuppuswamy, Information Security Architect, Zoho Corporation.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome, Ms. Deepa. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Lakshmi Nair, Managing Principal, APAC Synopsys Software Integrity Solution.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Ms. Lakshmi. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Vikas Yadav, CISO, Nykaa. So I would request all the attendees to share their question in the chat and the Q&A window. The session would be moderated by the Mr. Vikas. Over to you, Mr. Vikas.
Hi, thanks, Ishan. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on microservices security. So I think with the new age internet companies and the new advancement in technologies today, I think most companies are moving to the new microservices based architecture, and the times where you had millions of lines of code is changing. And I think the whole shift towards from monolith to microservices architecture has been driven primarily by cloud services, and therefore we have a lovely panel of speakers today, right from Synopsys to Zoho and Reliance Payment Solutions, Srihari. So we would like to seek their inputs on what are they doing in their companies to implement security in the microservices architecture. I would love to get your views on both how are you securing the base cloud infra, what are you doing for scanning images, how are you implementing security in Dockers, and also overall, how are you implementing security in the new SDLC cycle? And how is it implementing with Agile and DevOps? Also, it would be nice to hear your views around the fact that as to how has the relationship between the security and the DevOps teams and the developers changed with this new architecture? Are we facing more challenges than before? Are we looking for better security professionals? I think of calling them security engineers now. So what we'll do is, firstly, I'll give all of you an opportunity to just introduce yourself over a minute and two, and just talk a little bit about your experience. And then we can go over and ask you specific questions in detail as well. Over to you, Lakshmi, if you don't mind giving a short introduction.
Hello, everyone, and really glad to be part of this best practices meet by DSCI. I work with Synopsys as a managing principal and been in the industry for almost 20 years now. Been in different areas of security, starting from I started my journey as a developer and then moved into software security, and then travels through different areas like risk and compliance, privacy, and also into multiple threat management, threat intelligence experiences, and then now back to software security, where I work with the customers across the region, APAC region, to support them in their software security needs as part of Synopsys Software Integrity Solution. And I also represent VASIS India, that is Women in Cybersecurity India affiliate, as a general secretary and the founding member. And looking forward to this insightful discussion and sharing my views with all of you out here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that brief introduction, Lakshmi. Over to you, Deepa.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It was glad to be part of this best practices meet. I'm Deepa. Have been in this industry for the past 20 years with Zoho. My journey started again as a development and have been the engineering manager of many IT management products. And I transitioned into security over the last 10 years. I had the security team for Zoho, fully responsible for the Zoho Cloud services. And I have also worked with cloud security, DevSecOps, and privacy. These are the areas mainly I focus on.
Deepa. Shriyari, over to you. If you can, we're good friends.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Vikas. Thank you. All right, my name is Srihari. As Vikas mentioned, I'm acting as the Chief Information Security Officer for Reliance Payment Solutions Limited. Basically, I have, been 25 years of IT experience with. Over the last 20 years, I've been playing different InfoSec roles actually. So wherever the information security is most needed, I have been traveling from different entities, different domains. For last 7 years, actually, I have been actively into securing the digital payments of Reliance and Jio, right? Thanks for that, DSA for bringing me in. Actually, this is my most one of the important topic because as data has become more like a cash for everyone, but APIs are more like an assets of the organization, right? So the important assets of every organization, right? And so the focus is actually more now on the APIs. How do we secure the APIs, and which are very quickly, very rapidly changing for every organization, right? So this is about my quick introduction, right? Thank you. Over to you, Vikas.
Okay, thanks a lot, Shriyari. Just to give you a brief introduction about myself, I am presently the Chief Information Security Officer at Nykaa. We are a cloud-native company which sells luxury and beauty cosmetics goods. And though it's nice to see people with a lot of development background, I have a little completely different background. I served for 20 years in the defense, in telecom and infra IT space, and then transitioned to work in information security in first Max Life Insurance and then in Nykaa. So I will look forward to a lot of core domain experience from you, Lakshmi and Deepa, to give us insights and a little bit of practitioner and also a lot of practitioners' perspective, Shriyari, from you. So firstly, over to you, Lakshmi. What do you see? How have things changed since the time you used to write code? And earlier, I think, what was your view of securing applications, and how do you now having a lot of application security space in Synopsys? How do you see the change, and how do you advise your clients to secure this area? What kind of framework do you ask them to choose? A lot of questions, but I'll leave it to you to move the thread along.
Sure, Vikas. Very interesting question indeed, right? So back then when I started as a developer, right, that was the area when we had just started with the .NET era, and the Java boom was in as well. So a lot of that was we were the front end, back end, and then we have been talking about all those .NET based interfaces, and then SQL Server and DB2 and those databases. All of this was in the development thing. And honestly, I don't think security was ever a question beyond having a decent login feature at that point in time, right? And then but back then when I also look at how we looked at the performance of applications and versus how we are looking at this today, the speed at which we could host an application and get an application loaded, those were the only considerations at that point in time. We were still in that monolithic era, and over a lot of in number of years, at least until last few years, we have still been in the monolithic application era, right? So when I look at how microservices and the containerized development model introduced a drastic change, I would look at primarily when I look at all the advantages in one side, right? Right from the performance measures to how scalable these, how you can kind of containerize different functions and bring in more features that is accessible from anywhere. And the point that you mentioned about the cloud cloud development and cloud space that we are into. So all of this were coming into were the boom that microservices based on development has brought in, right? But then if I look at the flip side of it, yes, all of this is coming with bit of other different security challenges as well. For example, had it been then, we were talking about an authentication which will take care of your end-to-end user authentication across different business flows in an application, whereas when we look at a microservice-based architecture, the authentication in itself is something that we will look at. Okay, how do I take care of the authentication for my services level authentication versus the user level authentications across different microservices that we are communicating with each other, right? So that's one small part of the challenge that we see today. And then we look at, because microservices are running in a lightweight architecture, with often and they use HTTP and API services, they do communicate via APIs, right? Most of the communications are happening via APIs today. So they are exposed to a lot of vulnerabilities as well when it comes to the communication and interaction perspective as well. So they are prone to different attacks. Now, coming to the centralized management, I don't think we can talk about services mesh, etc. at a later stage about how we can bring in more standardization in how microservices can interact each other. We'll talk about it at a later stage. But then when we look at a centralized management of different microservices, I don't think we still have a framework or a standard way of looking at how do we put together all of them into place, right? And then the other aspect of how do we each microservices, because they are their own self-sufficient components in itself, they will have their own data storage and encryption mechanism that they will need to take care of. And then how vulnerable they are, how secure they are. Those are some of the considerations that we typically look at when it comes to microservices architecture per se. Now, when I look at how software security organizations or services providers and product vendors are looking at this aspect, is bringing more orchestration, more standardized approach in securing these containers. So that's where we talk about the container security as well, right? So how do we bring in the microservices put into very defined container images, how we can bring in more of a secure by design concept to help to address these risks in an ongoing basis, right? So there the cloud comes as a boom to us. We have Docker and Kubernetes platforms that can give its own way of securing how we host these microservices in itself, and then taking it. Definitely, there are security controls that we need to look at, in like hardening, secret management, so on and so forth. So we need to consider that. Now, if I look at as service providers, what do we suggest our customers? Definitely, the first thing and first foremost thing is how do we bring in the shift left concept? How do we bring in secured microservices architecture, and also bringing the best practices in designing your architecture, and also a lot of it is also achievable through the container security areas, right? So one of this that we always support our customers is to look at how do we evaluate the container environment in terms of how your application, how vulnerable your application images within the container are, and how they can be regularly scanned, and also look at a hardening standard for all of those images. And then that's something that that's a primary of suggestion that we go with our customers on putting together the right architecture before we get into anything else than monitoring, secret management, and etc. Yeah.
Thanks, Lakshmi. I think from a services point of view, I think you really brought out some key aspects of security, the design, looking after container security. So I want to ask Sherry, how many of these concepts are very easy to apply? And do you really get time being in a company which is innovating every day, coming up with new services every day? How much of design is possible? I'm not talking specifically about Jio, but I think overall industry specifically as to how can you build these best practices which a service provider like or a security consultant like Synopsys would offer you. So how do you bring out these best practices and implement while continuing to support the business with agility? And also your favorite topic after you covered this about API security, or maybe we can talk about it a little more today. Yes, please. Sherry, over to you. You're on mute, I believe, Sherry.
Yeah, thank you, Vikas. So I don't want to give some different example.
Can you hear us, Sherry? I think you can't.
I can hear you. Am I audible now? Is it okay? Fine. Right. So Vikas, so what I'm saying is, so there's nothing such best practices, but you need some practice actually to start with. I don't want to take some other organization because on the fly I cannot create examples like today. A financial services organization, right? It can be any organization. Typically, you have a wallet and a PC and a merchant acquiring business, right? Imagine. So all the customers would need some kind of 50 to 60 APIs in general. The merchants also would need more APIs because they have to do a lot with the order management, catalog management, coupons, etc., etc. And you have partners actually, close to some 1 lakh plus partners, who typically, use, the partners won't be having many APIs, actually, maybe some 10 APIs, debit, credit, right, update, reverse kind of thing. And you have number of APIs, within the organization or the backend systems talk to each other, right? It's a complete service mess, and that will be, each systems will be talking to each, right? So how do we actually, and not only the endpoints are your assets that you are actually, exposing to your outside people. What about the endpoint that you are consuming? Because certain consumption of endpoints also brings in some liabilities, right? In case you are not properly using, if you are not properly securing your credentials that you are consuming the others APIs, the indemnities and liabilities actually on you. So with your permission, I would like to quickly, as I said, I like to summarize quickly, so if you're able to see my screen, oops. Is it coming well? It's not coming, isn't it?
Not yet.
Oops, sorry.
It's all right. You try and bring it up. In the meanwhile, what I'll do is I'll ask Deepa once you bring it up. Deepa, what you've been for almost your entire career with Zoho. So how have you seen this thing being transformed? Sorry, I think let Shrihari complete
Yeah.
this first, and then we'll.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Shrihari.
Right. Right. So I would like to quickly introduce how I handle internally how I govern this APIs. If you are able to see my screen.
Yes, please.
So there is obviously a strategy needed. Actually, as Deepa and Lakshmi have been mentioning that so typically how you want to give your APIs. Is it containers, or is it distributed cloud environment, or is it a single system, right? How your backend is organized. So definitely you need to have a kind of strategy, right? That how you want to control, right? The strategy typically covers the most business aspects as well as your technological aspects, and you need to have a kind of the policies, frameworks, checklist. Like whenever you are actually giving your APIs to someone, actually you definitely need to have a kind of checklist. For example, some kind of vendors are providing you some development or giving the products to you. So obviously you need to have a kind of checklist actually before exposing any or before bringing in any new APIs, right? You need to have some standards that what should be the authentication, what should be my protocols, etc. And the architecture, I think you must have seen that something like ideal architecture or a kind of different architectures you can use. So DevSecOps, I don't want to cover much in depth because this is a very hot topic. Like every developer wanted to bring in some new API, right, without giving much window for testing, whether it's InfoSec testing or functional testing. So imagine that there are one single experience where it requires some 4 to 5 APIs, right? So the 4 to 5 developers actually wanted to independently take each API, right, independently without any integrated testing, right? So what is the impact actually for the from security perspective as well as the customer experience? If the guys independently take all the 4 or 5 APIs which talk to each other and in a different timelines, right? So what are the challenges in this DevSecOps? Doing this automation of this one. So also you next actually is a bit of granular controls you have to define. First thing actually, as I have been saying, that how many organizations really document that these are my APIs, right? These are my API versions. That how many are actually given to InfoSec team that look, these are this is my current set of API inventory, set, right? So also you have different user access management because as I said, it's a service mesh, right? You have as I said, actually lakhs of e-commerce organizations are using your APIs, right? Your consumers are using your APIs and all. So how do you do the user and access management, right? And how do you actually set your API gateway that which will control the access to your APIs, and how do you do the logging of who is consuming what? And at the monitor level, actually you need to have a fraud management, a step-up authentication. You may wonder that how a service layer actually can do the step-up of authentication. There are ways actually, because you can actually step up authentication based on various factors, right? Who is consuming that APIs and all. And there is actually you can detect the attacks in case someone is actually exploiting these APIs. You should be able to monitor that API consumption, and whenever needed, you can take down any API. For example, you can temporarily bring down a kind of NEFT transfer, or actually a payment API temporary period of time while not making the user experience bad. Like a user can still see his balance, but he won't be able to do some kind of transfer temporarily, or maybe he is able to do the transfer, but he may not be able to create a new beneficiary, right? So basically, whenever you see some kind of
just to interrupt you, really for the sake of time, if you can wrap up so that I can move to the other panelists as well.
Right. So because I'm just covering the last one, actually, that there is something called entitlement. This APS one has to regularly review that who is consuming which APS, And some APIs may be actually outdated, obsolete. You should actually clean up those kind of APIs. So this is the typical framework which we follow to ensure the security of the APIs. Yeah, sorry for taking some time more. Actually,
no, I think it was a very useful framework, which I think will be helpful. And I think the DSCI is also sharing a set of documents with all the audience, which can be used. So I think sharing this framework would be useful. In fact, I've already taken a screenshot to try and implement the same in my organization. So I think it's very useful. I think one of the audience has also asked a very simple question. Can you please explain what is being referred to as microservices? So Deepa, I will let you be, because you're the expert. You, I think, worked as a software engineer in Zoho to right to now being an information security architect. So I'll request maybe you can talk about your challenges, how they're transformed, what has changed in the microservice environment, and also give a brief explanation of what is exactly microservices. I can answer that, but I think you're better qualified to answer it. So I'll hand it over to you, and then we'll take more questions also.
Yeah, thanks, Vikas. For the clarity of the audience on what is microservices. So we had the earlier development architecture of a monolith architecture, where we had a 3-tier architecture. There is a web tier, the app tier, and the storage tier. User request lands on a web tier, and from there it passes on to the app tier, where all your business logic is coded, and then the storage tier holds the data. This is how software applications were developed. Even I think for the past, even before 10 years, or even currently, a lot of applications are still developed and deployed in this 3-tier architecture. So if you look at the app tier there, so all your business functionality, all your modules is going to be in a single app tier. Of course, you will scale it with multiple machines, but it is a single monolith. So from there, now what is the disadvantage of a monolith architecture? So yeah, as Vikas had mentioned, I have seen the 20 years of development cycle. I have been working in product where even a small bug fix will take around months to go out because of the dependency, the deployment speed, and the testing required to test the whole app tier. We have multiple dependencies between the various teams, and teams getting frustrated. So when you go to a microservices architecture, it can be very simply defined as very loosely coupled services, which is going to do one business function well. And a set of such microservices is going to be your application tier. So when I talk about the microservices and the transition from monoliths to microservices, we had it in our own organization. We had both experiences, like transferring from a single monolith to microservices, and also start any new application in a microservices first world. We do both. And why it is microservices? So when I talk about that, so the business goal is to innovate faster. So if you look at a product tech company like us, what does it mean, innovate faster? We need to deliver software rapidly, frequently, reliably. These are the 3 factors. Now, the disadvantage of monolithic architecture, when I have to put it in some metrics, now how fast a developer can go to deployment. Once he has done a code checking, how fast it goes into deployment. How many deployments can you do per day? So then what is the mean time to fix an outage or a failure? Or what percentage of your changes resulted in an outage? So all these can be looked as metrics for how you deliver software rapidly and reliably. And to achieve this goal of delivering software rapidly, reliably, I would put it in 3 points. We call it as a success triangle. We need all the 3. The first is going to be the process, the DevSecOps, the continuous delivery process, the security by design culture. This has to be the basic that needs to be developed within the organization culture. And then the structure. So when you talk about teams, when you're building a monolithic application with around, say, 100 people or 200 people, a smaller autonomous and empowered team works well in that process. So which does one thing very well, and they have total independence rather than depending on any other teams. So one is the organization structure, the process, and the third point in the triangle is going to be the architecture, where the microservices architecture provides a better way to achieve this goal. So is microservice architecture the single stop solution for all your problems? Of course not. Again, if you don't have the other three things, the proper DevOps, or you don't have automation testing, you don't have the inbuilt secure by design approach, you don't have security scanning tools, the microservices are just moving to microservices architecture is not going to give you the promised agility results. And even when you transition from a monolith architecture to a microservices architecture, we need to look at how do you split those microservices. It can be on a basic business functionality that goes as one microservices, because we have had this problem in our own company where sometimes developers, they go overboard and say, okay, more the microservices, more the merry, and we have a lot of 200, 300 microservices for a complex application. The number is not important here, but it is very important to arrive at a service decomposition logic. Because when you have a lot of microservices which is not split properly, that can again increase your east-west traffic, can increase your operational complexities. And again, we had one more challenge where even after splitting the microservices, any change now required changes across all the microservices. Then you're not doing it correctly. So if you don't have the independent microservices where the teams can be independent and deploy on their own, so your service decomposition logic needs to be worked upon. And the other aspect, as from a developer, prior developer, now as a security member. So, but I feel still though it has microservices has some challenges, we as a security community should be open to embrace these microservices basically because, yeah, we have a simpler module code structure, which is the security complexity, I would say, is going to be a very big enemy for security. So we have a very simple code structure that is going to aid us in all ways. And also faster distribution of security patches. Now with this microservice architecture, I think we could do multiple deployments a day, and any vulnerability that is found gets fixed and goes into production easier, which is a win for the security team. And it also reduces the overall risk. Say, if you have designed your microservices well, even a security vulnerability, the impact is going to cause is going to be within that microservice, and it does not allow the lateral movement to other microservices and availability as such. So now you can scale those microservices independently. So that is more beneficial, and it increases the availability posture of the application. So these are some good scenarios where microservices, specifically for the security community, we should be open to embrace the microservices. The other thing I want to talk about is the polyglot architecture is one keyword when we talk about microservices. So in the development side, this gives the advantage of the developers can pick up their own technology stack, they can pick up their own programming language. Say, before, if it was a monolith architecture, you're tied to possibly one programming language. If it is Java, it is like all modules, all functionalities in Java. Now the developers, they have the freedom to look at various technology stacks or programming language which will be beneficial for their own module. But this again brings in a security challenge also, because we need security experts in those specific areas who should take responsibility for defining the security practices, guidelines, and even the security scanning tools. Like, say, if I'm going to bring in Python, I'm going to bring in Go language. So we should have the specific security static code analysis, dynamic testing, and these should be integrated into the build process. So from a centralized organization, we also move to an approach where security experts are embedded within each microservices team. So that is
Thanks, Deepa. I think I couldn't. No one could have explained it better. And I would love to get you on a session with my developers and my security team as well. I think the kind of explanations which Lakshmi, Shrihari, and Deepa have given should give a very good introduction to microservices as well. I will not be able to add value to this thing, but I can also add an analogy in terms of how, let's say, bees build a honeycomb structure. So when bees go around building a small honeycomb honey cell, so a microservice is something like that. It's self-contained, independent on its own. And when additional services keep adding, each cell builds and becomes a strong fabric together. So that's a very like a human analogy to, or a real life analogy to microservices. But what you also need to understand is that microservices have their own requirements in terms of like what Deepa mentioned. You need to have a strong environment for virtualization, cloud as an enabler, though obviously on-prem microservices can also be deployed. Also, additional services like the ability to deploy faster. So, because we have a very less time available, what I'll do is I'll just I'll ask a very few specific questions which the audience have asked. One specific question was, have you seen, what is your opinion about overuse of microservices? Can you quote a few examples where this approach should not be used? Please try to.
Sorry, Vikas is out. Shall I take it on actually in the Vikas absence? If I'm audible. So there are a couple of questions. What I've seen is actually that how does the API gateway secure the APIs? And second is that if there is AI in can be used to secure the APIs. With your permission, just I would like to answer this. So again, I would like to share my screen. Apologies, this is not my creation. Actually, I have stolen it from somewhere, but I thought it's relevant. So. Right, so I would like to explain that, give an example that imagine that this service 1 is a core banking system, service 2 is actually a kind of NEFT transfer, service 3 is actually a kind of debit or payment API, and the fourth one is a balance inquiry API, right? And all these APIs also have to talk to each other. For example, while doing the NEFT transfer, for example, service 3, service 3, so service 3 has to talk to service 1 also after making the payment. It has to say that, look, debit the 1,000 rupees from account number 1 and credit it to account number 2, right? There is a lot of inter-talking of API should happen, right? And also client is the one who is initiating, whether he want to have a balance inquiry or whether he want to do, a kind of NEFT transfer, or he want to change some kind of profile information, right? So here is the API gateway comes into picture, where I'm actually offloading, that deciding that who can access which API, right? For example, service 2, service 3 can talk to service 1, but not the service 4. Or similarly, service 1 cannot talk to, service 2, service 3, vice versa, right? And also client can actually do directly certain, access to service 2 and 3 and 4, but not service 1, right? So all these rules, etc., you can actually define in the API gateway. In addition to that, you can enable number of controls, something like a kind of web application firewall, or kind of session management, or rate limiting, or what type of authentication, different types of authentications are available, right? Or kind of encryption. There are many ways. Today API gateways are actually enriched with number of features. And for someone actually organization like Reliance, no API gateway is actually fitting into the requirement. So we have made our own API gateway actually to meet all our requirements, right? So this is what is actually answering one question. Second question is that someone is asking that is the AI can be used? Yes, AI can be used. If you want to set up some rules actually that why there is a extensive use of like AI can be any rules, right? It can be authentication or excessive usage or fraud, right? Or someone actually, for example, like a fraud management rules. A client is actually generally sit in Hyderabad, but actually suddenly he started accessing from from Bihar, let's say, right? Or some kind of remote place in Bihar, right? Or multiple actually clients are using the same account, right? So many ways actually that today we can actually build the AI-based concepts and AI-based capabilities on the API gateway as well as in other services where actually they can bring in a lot of value to secure the APIs, right? So this is a short answer from my side for some of the questions, right? I hope this answers. I'm sorry because you
Thanks,
are
Srihari.
taking it over.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I think we all troubled with internet woes. So thanks a lot for the good answer. I was able to take some snippets in the end, Srihari, and obviously I'll connect offline as well. I think before we just end, any key one or two pointers from each one of you for the audience to take away. If I'll request you to brief because I think our time is already over. Just last key points, maybe maybe just one guideline or thing you want to take away from this session. Lakshmi, first you.
Okay. Hi. So I wanted to take the analogy from of the honeycomb that you mentioned, right, Vikas? So one of the things that and I think that's a key takeaway that I wanted to give to the audience as well. So honeycomb, if you throw a stone to that, it's very easy that it can break and it can create a chaos around, right? So the same thing could happen if you have microservices which are very tightly connected. Definitely they are working very well together. But when we look at a failure mode, and if one of this fails and that gets transferred into all associated nodes, that would be a complete DDoS situation, right? So when we put together a microservice architecture, I think it's important that each of them should take care of the failure mode in its own, and that doesn't pass on to the overall performance of the other components within the application. So that's one takeaway in terms of the availability of microservices that I want to pass on.
Lakshmi, thanks a lot. Wonderful advice. Deepa, any final tip from you in short, one or two lines?
Yeah. So we have come a long way in all this microservices architecture. We have seen a lot of successful deployments. I would like to quote a few standard references. There is a NIST one and there is a Cloud Security Alliance. Both of these organizations have even released basic standards to follow for the secure microservices architecture. That would be a good place to start with. And do it much in the design phase. So again, secure by design is also the mantra we should follow even when you go for a microservices architecture. Plan before on what you're going to build as a microservices, how is it going to affect your development life cycle, and how is availability, resiliency, as Lakshmi pointed out, how are you going to factor it in? That will be my point.
Great. I think that's very useful advice, and that's why Zoho is building some great world-class products.
Thank you for that.
Thierry, I think you've given wonderful advice and snippets, and I would love really be helpful if you share it, your slides with the audience as well as with us also. And any final tips?
So right, the final one actually, because now everything is becoming an APIs, right? So you have to deal with hundreds of APIs in every organization, and every day there will be a lot of changes, right? So you can't stop the deployment at the same time. You have to trade between securing the APIs as well as helping the faster deployment of the APIs. So you have to draw a balance that for that you have to do some kind of classification of APIs or the systems which are actually involved, and you have to let some systems go with the rapid deployment of the APIs, right? That you have to take the call, right? And also at the same time, you have to trade some kind of negotiation at the toll gates that look, I let you deploy all these APIs at your will, but this specific set of APIs are where the customer experience is affected or some kind of payments related, financial and all. You won't actually want it to be deployed automatically using the CI/CD pipeline, right? As I said earlier, 4 developers take actually 4 APIs. But finally, actually, something goes to the user experience thing. That's where actually you want to stop, and because as a standalone API, where you have a Postman collection testing and all, it's not really an efficient testing. Actually, if you get in just a Postman, because the complete logical assessment, actually business logic and exploitation assessment, you can do it only through an integrated testing. So you have to give a trading actually that the faster deployment as well as security of deployment. So
thanks a lot, Srihari. I think Lakshmi, Deepa, Shrihari have all given very useful inputs. I think my final takeaway would also be from the business logic part, which Shrihari was talking about. Do understand the business, see how it works for there, and also try and integrate your security aspects to them. And finally, the security for all security practitioners, have a great relationship with the developers, DevOps, and other teams as well. Thanks a lot, and thanks to DSCI for giving us this opportunity to talk about microservices and how to implement security within that. Thanks a lot, everyone. Over to you, Ishan, the DSCI team. Thanks a lot.
Great, Vikas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mr. Vikas, for moderating the session, and thanks a lot, Mr. Shrihari, Ms. Deepa, and Ms. Lakshmi. Thanks a lot for the wonderful session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ishan.
Thank you.